The repaired systems of the Star Treader hummed with a new, quiet efficiency. Captain Jin looked at his restored screens, the star maps crisp and clear. The feeling of being blind was gone, but it was replaced by a deeper uncertainty. The alien warship had not moved. It simply waited. Beside him, Mira monitored the incredible data from her newly tuned sensors. She could now detect the faintest energy signatures, but the giant ship before them still registered as little more than a shaped hole in space. It was a reminder of how much they could not see. On the Valiant Blade, Captain Kwan was dealing with his own silence. His weapons were dead. His pride was broken. He stared at the view screen, waiting for the retaliation that had not come, feeling more exposed by their mercy than he ever would have by their anger. Then a new signal arrived. It came to both ships at once, clean and strong. It was not a text message this time. It was a visual and audio broadcast. The main viewer on the Star Treader flickered and changed. A face appeared. He was human. His hair was dark and cut short. His skin was weathered around the eyes, which held a calm, steady focus. He wore a simple gray uniform with no flashy medals. This was Commander Day. He looked directly ahead, as if meeting the gaze of everyone watching. To the vessels of the Terrelian Consortium, he began. His voice was not loud, but it filled the quiet bridge. He spoke in perfect, unhurried Terrelian. I am Commander Day of the Allied Nations ship Dauntless. We apologize for the disruption to your mission. Jin found he was holding his breath. The sheer normalcy of the face, the polite tone, was unsettling after the display of godlike power. You have questions, Day continued. The first is why we are here, hidden in your space. The answer is not to hide from you. He paused, letting the words sink in. We are here to guard. A new image replaced his face on the screen. It was a star map, but not of any sector Jin recognized. The scale was terrifyingly vast. It showed a spiral arm of a neighboring galaxy. At its edge, a wave of red markers pulsed, like a slow-moving stain. The stain was heading toward a faint, dotted line that represented the intergalactic void. What you see is the forward edge of the Devourer swarm, Day said. The name was flat, factual, carrying a weight of pure dread. A xenotype species. They do not communicate. They do not build. They only consume. They move from galaxy to galaxy, stripping all biological and mineral resources. Your science has not yet detected them. They are still years away. But they are coming. Myra leaned forward, her scientist's mind seizing on the data. The scale of the swarm was apocalyptic. The energy signatures, even from the distant reading, were monstrous. This region of space, Day said, and the map zoomed in to show their current location, is a quiet door. One of many they might use. Our fleet is not here to threaten you. It is here to hold the door shut. Jin felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. The debris field, the countless silent ships they had first mistaken for wreckage. That was the fleet. A fleet large enough to guard a galaxy. And the Dauntless was just one sentinel. You showed restraint, Day said, and his eyes seemed to look directly at the Valiant Blade. You tested, but you did not attack with true malice. You acted from fear and a duty to protect your own. We understand this. It is why you are still here, listening to me now. His expression grew more solemn. But you must understand the reality you now live in. If your shot had been fired with the intent to kill, if your heart had been full of conquest instead of confusion, you would have vanished. Not a scar on space. Not a particle of dust left to mark your passing. We are guardians, but we are not gentle. The night we watch is too dark for gentleness. The finality in his voice was absolute. It was not a threat. It was a simple, chilling statement of fact. like explaining that fire burns. The data packet we are sending contains our preliminary observations of the swarm, and the frequencies you can use to call for help if you ever need it, they said. His face returned to the screen, alone. You are not alone in this dark. But the rules have changed. Your galaxy is not an empty cradle. It is a garden, and there are things in the deeper night that would burn it to the ground. We are one of the walls against that fire. Choose your future allies wisely. Choose your actions with great care. He gave a single slow nod. Safe travels, captains. The transmission ended. The screen returned to the view of the stars and the dark, angular silhouette of the Dauntless. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then, the edges of the massive warship began to blur. It was not a sudden cloaking. It was a slow fade, like a mountain dissolving into mist. The sharp line softened. The starlight behind it began to wink through its body. Within a minute, the Ann's Dauntless was gone. Space where it had been was empty, just as it had been when they first arrived. On the Star Treader, the silence was profound. Jin finally let out the breath he was holding. He looked at Mira. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a new kind of aeronautic technology, but at the sheer, terrible scale of existence. They were not hiding from us, Mira whispered. They were hiding for us. Jin nodded. He looked at the now empty viewer. The galaxy no longer felt vast and inviting. It felt small and precious, and under a protection so immense it defied understanding. They had come to study cosmic history, and had instead found the guardians of their future. On the valiant blade, Captain Kwan finally unclenched his hands from his chair. The shame was still there, but it was now mixed with a grim, sober understanding. He had been playing a game of borders and warnings. He had stumbled into a war for existence itself, a war that had been silently raging at the edges of everything he knew. His warning shot had been less than a whisper in that storm. Both Tyrellian ships hung in the silence. The shared data packet glowed on their screens, a gift and a burden. It contained maps of a threat they could scarcely imagine, and a promise of help from a power they could not comprehend. Jin took control of his ship again. Navigation, plot a course back to Consortium Prime, maximum safe speed. His voice was tired, but clear. We have a report to make. One that will change everything. As the Star Treader and the valiant blade turned and moved away from the silent, empty sector, their crews looked back. They saw only stars. But they now knew the truth. The stars were not just lights. They were the backdrop for a watch that never ended. They had met humanity, and they had not been conquered. They had been astonished. They had been warned. And in a way, they were still struggling to understand they had been saved. The universe was a far more dangerous and wonderful place than they had believed just hours before. And they were not alone in it. The air on the Harmony's Resolve always smelled faintly of ozone and recycled water. It was a smell Kim Jae had grown used to over the past 6 months. He stood at the large observation window, looking down at the mottled brown and green surface of Cenaria. From up here, the civil war tearing the planet apart was invisible. It was just a world, quiet and beautiful. J was a peacekeeper. That was his official title with the Galactic Concord. Most species in the Concord saw it as a polite term for a low-level security officer, a monitor who filed reports and called for real soldiers if trouble started. But humanity had a different idea about the job. They were new to the galaxy, and they weren't the strongest or the smartest. But they had a strange talent. They could talk. They could listen. They could find a thread of common feeling in the middle of a hate-filled argument. So the Concord sent humans to places like Cenaria, where talking had stopped working. Sergeant J. He turned. Lee Hanna, the young diplomatic attached from Earth, stood there with a data pad. She was sharp and learned fast, but the tension on the station still showed in the tight line of her shoulders. Yes, Hannah? Commander Vral wants the patrol schedule for Sector 7, she said. Again, he says the rotation is insufficient for security parameters. Jay took the pad and made a small adjustment. Vral was a Boran, the head of station security. The Boran were big, thick-skinned, and believed that every problem looked like a nail because they only carried hammers. They had deep respect for strength and very little for patience. There, Jay said, handing it back. Tell him the human team will handle the inspection of Docking Bay 3 today. His people can take a break. Hannah looked worried. Is that wise? The Cenarian rebels in Bay 3. Commander Tev is unpredictable. The Boran think he's a bomb waiting to go off. Tev is scared, Jay said, his voice calm and low. His people are starving because of the blockade. He doesn't see diplomats. He sees more people who want to lecture him. Maybe if he sees someone who isn't pointing a gun at him, he'll listen for a minute. Hannah didn't look convinced, but she nodded. That was the human method. Be present. Be consistent. Be unthreatening, even when threatened. It had worked on 4 other conflict zones. Jay believed it could work here not an hour later. Jay walked slowly toward Docking Bay 3. He went alone, as he usually did. A squad of armored Boran would undo weeks of careful work. He carried no visible weapon, just a comm unit and a medical kit. The heavy door to the bay hissed open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of engine fuel. A single Cenarian transport ship, its hull scorched from laser fire, sat in the center. Around it were crates and a handful of Cenarian rebels. They all turned to look at him, hands moving toward their weapons. In front of them stood TEV.TE, was tall for a Cenarian, with gray skin and sharp, nervous eyes. He had a frayed dignity about him, like a soldier who knew he was losing, but refused to kneel. Peacekeeper, Tev said, the word sounding like an insult. Come to give more empty promises from the Concord? No promises, Commander, Jay said, stopping a polite distance away. Just checking in. I heard your medical supplies were low. I brought some basics. He held up the kit. Tev's eyes narrowed. This small act of help, with no strings attached, was a human trick. It confused him. For a moment, the suspicion in his face softened. He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward cautiously to take the kit dot. This was the moment. This tiny crack in the wall. Jay had learned to wake in these moments, to say nothing and let the other person decide to build the bridge. He simply stood, his posture relaxed, his hands open at his sides. The bay door crashed open again. 3 Boran security guards marched in, their heavy boots clanging on the metal deck. They were in full combat armor, and their leader had a large pulse rifle held across his chest. They had not been scheduled to be here. Commander Vral must have countermanded Jay's plan. The fragile moment shattered. Tev's men yelled and raised their weapons. Tev himself spun, his face twisting in rage. A trap. He screamed at Jay. You led them here. Commander Tev, no. Jay said, his voice rising but still trying to pierce the panic. This was not my order. Stand down. Everyone, lower your weapons. But the Boran leader was shouting too, his voice a deep roar amplified by his helmet. Drop your weapons, Cenarian scum. By Concord authority. It was a disaster unfolding in seconds. One of Tev's younger soldiers, terrified by the sudden appearance of the huge Boran, fumbled with his energy pistol. A searing blue bolt shot from the barrel, going wide and hitting the ceiling. The Boran reacted as they were trained to do. They fired. A pulse blast, meant for the armed Cenarian, lanced across the bay. Jay didn't think. He moved. He stepped directly into the path of the blast, putting himself between the Boran's fire and Tev. He held up both hands, palms out, facing the Boran. His mouth was open. The word hold, tearing from his throat. The Boran guard, panicked, did not hold. The brilliant white pulse hit Kim Jae square in the chest. It passed through his body in a fraction of a second. Its energy only slightly weakened, and struck Tev behind him. There was no dramatic scream. Just two soft, simultaneous thuds as Jae and Tev collapsed to the cold deck. A wisp of smoke rose from Jae's simple gray uniform. His eyes, wide open a second before, saw nothing. Silence, heavy and absolute, fell over the docking bay. Then chaos erupted. Cenarians wailed. Boran shouted into their coms. From the doorway, Lee Hana stood frozen. She had come to bring Jae a message. She saw it all. She saw the calm, patient sergeants step into the line of fire. She saw the Boran shoot without hesitation. She saw him fall. Her body went cold. Her diplomatic training kicked in, a machine inside her taking over. She noted the time. She noted the positions. She noted the expression on the Boran guard's face as he lowered his weapon and realized what he had done. She stored it all away in a place that felt like ice. Then she turned and walked quickly, not to the command center, but to a secure human communications terminal back in the bay. The Boran security leader walked over to the two bodies. He nudged Jae's shoulder with his boot. Regrettable, he grunted to his team. Crossfire. The human was in the way. File the report. The Cenarian terrorist is dead. That is the important thing. To them, it was a simple, if messy, outcome. One overly soft peacekeeper and one rebel leader. A balance sheet. They did not look at Kim Jae's face. They did not see the man who had believed he could build a peace, one quiet conversation at a time. They saw a casualty, an incident, a line in a report. They did not know they had just broken the only rule that mattered. They did not know that on a world called Earth, a single report was already being written. A report that would not be about an incident. It would be about a declaration. But for now, on the Harmony's resolve, there was only the smell of ozone, recycled air, and the sharp, metallic scent of fresh blood cooling on the deck. The news traveled faster than light, carried on the official and encrypted channels of the Concorde. It reached the United Earth Government complex in Seoul in the middle of the night. The first person to read the full report was Choi Young, the head of external intelligence. He sat in his quiet, dark office, the glow of the screen the only light. He read the dry account of this security incident, and then he opened the attachment. From attached Lee Hana, it was not a diplomatic report. It was a sensor log from her datapad, time-stamped and unedited. It showed the docking bay. It showed Sergeant Kim Jae stepping forward, his hands up. It showed the blinding flash from the Boran weapon. It showed the two bodies falling. The last few seconds were shaky, focused on Jae's still face on the deck. Then the recording stopped. Choi Young did not move for a long time. He was a man who dealt in secrets and lies, in shades of gray. This was not gray. This was a simple, brutal fact on a screen. He picked up his direct line. Within an hour, the key people were assembled. They were not woken with alarm, but with a single quiet phrase on their secure comms. The Guardian is down. It was a code no one ever wanted to hear. It meant a human peacekeeper had been killed in the line of duty. President Park Min-seo entered the secure situation room. She was dressed in a simple dark suit, her face clean of any makeup, her expression composed. She did not look tired. She looked utterly present. General Kim Tae-shik was already there, standing like a stone pillar beside the main holographic display. His hands were clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. Choi Young stood at the other end of the table, the data from his screen now displayed in the air for them all to see. They watched the recording. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the projectors. When it finished, the image of Kim Jae's service photo was displayed next to it. He was smiling, a gentle, ordinary smile. General Kim was the first to break the silence. His voice was gravel. The Boran hegemony has already filed their preliminary statement. They classify it as a regrettable crossfire incident during a lawful security operation. The Concord is urging calm. They are initiating a full inquiry. President Park's eyes stayed on Jay's photo. What do their words mean, General? In plain language, Kim Tae-shik let out a slow breath. It means they think he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It means they believe the death of the Cenarian rebel was the primary objective, and Jay was collateral damage, an accident. The Concord's inquiry will take standard cycles. They will eventually issue a finding, probably criticizing the Boran for poor procedure. There will be a recommendation for retraining. They will offer us a blood guilt payment. Standard for the death of a minor species member on active service. The word minor hung in the air. What is the public reaction? Park asked, turning to Choi Young. Just breaking on the nets now, Madam President, Choi Young said. It is. Raw. They are calling him the Peacekeeper of Scenaria. They are showing pictures of his family. His parents in Bizen. The anger is total. President Park nodded slowly. She walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping city. Lights glittered like scattered stars. A city of peace, protected by a choice her species made every single day. Play the Boran statement, she said. A new window opened in the hologram. A Boran official, his thick neck and severe face filling the frame, spoke in the guttural common tongue of the Concord. The Boran hegemony expresses formal regret for the death of the human monitor during a complex operation against a designated terrorist threat. A gesture of condolence, in accordance with Galactic Convention, will be transferred to the human government. We trust this closes the matter. The recording ended. General Kim's fists were clenched now. A gesture of condolence. They are buying off a life for the price of a cargo shipment. President Park turned from the window. Her composure was complete, but her eyes were like dark ice. They do not understand, she said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. They see a failed mission report. They see a monitor, a minor species casualty. They do not see what they have actually done. She walked back to the table and placed her palms flat on its cool surface, leaning toward her two most senior advisors. They killed a man who was there because he believed in peace. They killed him not in battle, but in the act of trying to prevent one. They killed him while his hands were empty and held up in a gesture of stop. And then they called it an accounting error. She straightened up. Humanity joined the Concord because we believed our way had value. We chose to be the calm voice. We chose to wear the gray uniform instead of the warsuit. We thought if we showed enough patience, enough empathy, the galaxy would learn that strength is not just in the barrel of a gun. She looked at the frozen image of the Boran official. We were wrong. They interpreted our choice as a limitation, as weakness. She turned to General Kim Tae-shik. General, recall every deployed vessel, every deep-range patrol, every border observer. Activate the War Reserve Fleet from the Luna shipyards. Prepare the arsenal. All of it. General Kim did not question. He did not ask for confirmation. He saw the look in his president's eyes. He simply nodded. What are our objectives, Madam President? Our objective is not victory, she said. Victory implies a contest. This is not a contest. This is a lesson. A single simple lesson that every species in the galaxy will remember for 1,000 generations. She looked back at Kim Jae's smiling photo. They need to learn the value we place on one of our peacekeepers. Since they cannot understand our peace, they will now understand our war. For the next 24 hours, Earth was silent to galaxy. The Concorde sent frantic messages, asking for dialogue, promising a fair investigation. The Boran sent a formal note confirming the transfer of the condolence payment. Inside Earth's government, a machine was turning that had not turned in decades. Ships changed course. Dormant factories on Mars and in the asteroid belts flared to life. Soldiers were recalled from leave. The public anger did not fade. It crystallized. It became a cold, hard thing. There were no calls for revenge in the streets. There was a quiet, terrifying expectation. Finally, President Park Min-seo stood before a plain black screen in the Situation Room. This was not a public address. This was a transmission to every Concorde world, every embassy, every Boran listening post. Her face was calm. To the Galactic Concorde and the Boran hegemony, she began, no title, no greeting. You have received the report on the death of Sergeant Kim Jae. You have called it an incident. You have offered payment. She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly through the screen at every being watching. We do not accept your payment. We do not recognize your inquiry. You have made a fundamental error in judgment. You believed our peacekeeping was a service we provided because we could do nothing else. You were wrong. It was a discipline we chose. Sergeant Kim Jae was the embodiment of that choice. Her voice did not rise. It remained clear, level, and final. For the murder of Peacekeeper Sergeant Kim Jae, the human species severs all diplomatic and economic relations with the Boran hegemony. Furthermore, we declare a state of absolute war. In the Concorde chambers, where translators worked furiously, there was a moment of confusion. Absolute war was an ancient term, unused for millennia. Then the meaning became clear. No negotiation. No terms of surrender. No settlement. It was war until one side could no longer fight. President Park finished, her last words dropping like stones. There will be no negotiation. There will be no settlement. There will be no terms of surrender. Only cessation. The transmission ended. On the Boran homeworld, the leaders scoffed. A minor species declaring an ancient form of war? It was a tantrum. They would swat these upstart humans aside and teach them their place. On Earth, General Kim Tae-shik looked at the deployment maps now glowing across the hologram. Hundreds of ship icons were moving into formation. He did not feel anger. He felt a grim, precise clarity. The choice had been made for them. The time for peace was over. The lesson was about to begin. The Boran frontier world of Carax 4 was a fortress. It orbited a dull red star, a rocky world covered in mining facilities and military bases. Its atmosphere was thin and cold, but its value was in the heavy metals dug from its crust. It was also the first major outpost on the route from Earth. Legion Captain Burrows stood on the command bridge of the orbital defense platform Iron Fist. Below him, the planet's surface was dotted with the lights of industry. In the dark ocean of space, the flashing lights of his patrol ships moved in steady, confident patterns. He had received the human declaration of absolute war. He and his fellow officers had laughed. It was a dramatic phrase from a species known for soft words. The humans had a small fleet, mostly light escort ships and diplomatic vessels. Their technology was decent, but simple. They used kinetic weapons, metal slugs fired with magnetism. It was brute force physics, easy to counter with energy shields. The Boran used focused plasma pulses and proton beams. More advanced, more powerful. Burrow's thick fingers tapped on the console. The humans would come here first, he was sure. They would try to make a point. His orders were to crush them utterly, to turn their fleet into dust and broadcast the images to the Concorde. It would be a short, brutal lesson in real galactic power. He imagined the fight. The human ships would try to get close, to use their railguns. His defense platforms would tear them apart from long range. It would be more of a slaughter than a battle. "Captain," a sensor officer called out. Multiple jump signatures. At the system's edge. "It's them." Burrow smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Right on time. Alert all platforms. Power primary weapons. Order the patrol groups to form a defensive screen. Let them come." The human ships dropped out of their faster-than-light travel. Burrow watched them appear on the tactical screen. At first, he frowned. The numbers were wrong. There were not a dozen ships, or 24. There were over 80. And they were not the blocky, simple designs his intelligence files showed. These ships were sleek, with angles that seemed to swallow the starlight. They were dark gray, almost black. "Identify." He barked. "Profile mismatch," the sensor officer said, confusion in his voice. "They are registering as human, but the designs, they are not in our database. Energy signatures are minimal. They are very quiet." Before Burrow could process this, things began to happen very fast. From the human formation, a cloud of smaller objects shot forward. Not missiles, but tiny drones, thousands of them. They moved like a swarm of insects, fast and unpredictable. They were not heading for his ships. They were heading for the network of communication and sensor satellites that ringed the planet. The drones latched onto the satellites. For a second, nothing happened. Then, every single satellite went dark at the same time. Carax 4 was blind. The defense platforms could no longer talk to each other. The patrol ships lost their coordinated tracking, switched to secondary systems. Burrow roared. But the secondary systems were also failing. The human drones were emitting a strange, pulsing signal. It was not a jammer. It was a virus. It found the tiny flaws in the Boran software, flaws the Boran never knew were there, and it exploited them. Screens on the Iron Fist flickered and showed nonsense code. Weapon systems went into safe mode, refusing to activate. They hacked us? Burrow couldn't believe it. Hacking was a tool of spies, not of honorable fleet combat. Then the human ships moved. They did not form a battle line. They broke into small, fast groups and shot past the confused Boran patrols. The patrol ships fired their plasma cannons, but the human vessels moved with impossible agility, twisting away from the slow-moving bolts of energy. A few human ships were hit, their shields flaring bright blue before failing, but most slipped through. Their target was not the Boran fleet. It was the planet below. They are entering the atmosphere. They are deploying ground forces. The sensor officer yelled, looking at the few screens still working. On the surface of Carax 4, alarms blared. Boran soldiers scrambled to defensive positions around the main spaceport and the planetary command center. They expected dropships to land, disgorging human troops for a frontal assault. They did not get a frontal assault. The human ships, now in the atmosphere, opened their launch bays. What came out were not dropships, but pods. Dozens of them, screaming down from the sky like meteors. They did not land in open fields. They smashed directly into the roofs of key buildings, the command center, the power distribution hub, the shield generator complex. From these pods, soldiers emerged. Human soldiers in powered armor. But it was not the bulky armor the Boran used. This armor was sleek, fitting the human form closely, and it moved with a speed that was frightening. It was like watching liquid metal come to life. Captain Kang Soo-jin was the first out of her pod. Her helmet display showed her the layout of the Boran command center, already mapped from orbit. Her squad, the Stone Dragons, fanned out behind her. Their orders were clear: dismantle, disable, destroy. Do not engage in prolonged fights. Hit the key points and move. A squad of Boran soldiers rounded a corner, their heavy plasma rifles firing. The blue bolts filled the hallway. Kang did not stop moving. She ducked under one blast, her armor's joints whirring softly, and fired her own weapon. It was not a laser or a plasma bolt. It was a hypervelocity slug, a small piece of metal moving faster than sound. It punched straight through the Boran's chest plate and the wall behind him. The Boran soldier fell. The fight was not a fight. It was a swift, clinical removal. The humans moved in teams of two, covering each other, their communication silent and perfect. They used grenades that emitted a blinding flash and a sound pulse that disabled Boran electronics. They cut power lines. They placed small, precise charges on reactor cores. On the bridge of the Iron Fist, Legion Captain Burrow watched in horror as the surface of his fortress world turned into a map of chaos. Red symbols blinked out one by one: power plants, communications towers, weapon batteries. His own ships were trying to fight, but they were blind and disorganized. The few human ships in space danced around them, firing those relentless kinetic slugs. A Boran cruiser's shields would stop the first and the second, but the 10th slug would hit the exact same spot, and the 11th would punch through the armor. It was not a war of brute strength. It was a war of perfect, terrible accuracy. It was a war of 1,000 small cuts, each one placed exactly where it would hurt the most. After 6 hours, the main planetary shield generator exploded in a silent flash on the surface. The energy dome protecting Carax 4 flickered and died. Burrow knew it was over. His mighty fortress had not been defeated in a glorious battle. It had been taken apart like a broken machine. A new signal came over the general frequency. It was a visual broadcast. It showed security footage from a docking bay. It showed a human in a gray uniform stepping forward, his hands up. It showed a Boran guard firing. It showed the human falling. Then it showed a service photo of Kim Jae, smiling. Below it were his name, his rank, and the date of his death. There was no sound, no message. Just that loop, playing over and over on every Boran screen that still had power. Legion Captain Burrow stared at the image on his cracked command screen. He looked at the human's calm face in the photo. He thought of the human's calm face as he stepped into the line of fire. And for the first time, a cold, sick understanding began to crawl into his mind. This was not an attack for territory. This was not a war for resources. This was something else. This was a statement. The humans were not angry. They were precise. They had not come with shouts of vengeance. They had come with the quiet, methodical purpose of a surgeon removing a cancer. They had chosen peace. And the Boran had made them choose this. As his bridge descended into panic, Burrow sat very still, watching the loop of the Peacekeeper's death. And he felt true fear. Write Part 4. All of them one by one of 1,200 words, each in a separate document, and it should be interesting, and write it in third-person style. And it should be in simple and basic English. Use simple and basic English, and don't create more chapters. Headings or parts numbers in each part. Without heading, the silence from Earth was the most terrifying part. After the destruction of Carax 4, there were no boasts, no threats, no demands. The human fleet simply regrouped, resupplied from fast-moving tenders, and moved to the next Boran outpost. And the next, the Galactic Concord, was in chaos. The Grand Chamber, usually a place of slow debate and procedure, buzzed with panic. Representatives from 100 species argued, their voices overlapping. The attack on Carax 4 had been broadcast by Boran survivors. Everyone had seen it. They had seen the fortress world fall not in a fiery battle, but with a cold, methodical efficiency that felt wrong. This was not how war was waged in the modern galaxy. There were rules. There were protocols. There was, at the very least, a conversation before the shooting started. Senator Zill, a conciliator, tried to bring order. The conciliators were a species built for diplomacy, with soft voices and gentle faces. Order, please. We must have order. We must condemn this human aggression and demand an immediate ceasefire. We must bring both parties to the table. But there were no parties. Only one party was talking. The Boran ambassador, a scarred veteran named Gare, slammed his heavy fist on the podium. They are monsters. They are cowards. They attack without honor, using tricks and poison. The silence over Boran Prime was deeper than space. The planet, a gray-blue orb streaked with clouds, hung in the void. Its famous orbital shipyards were gone. Twisted metal and frozen debris formed a grim new ring around the world. Its defensive fleet was scattered across a dozen systems, now just expanding clouds of cooling gas and shattered hulls. The great communications arrays were silent. The planet was cut off. Blind and mute dot in orbit, the human fleet waited. It did not form an aggressive blockade. The ships simply held position at the Lagrange points, steady as mountains. They made no move to descend. They launched no missiles. They were watchers. On the surface, in the fortified war citadel, the last of the Boran leadership gathered. Elder War Master Grash felt the weight of his centuries in his bones. He had led fleets, conquered worlds, and made the Boran hegemony a name that commanded respect and fear. Now he sat in a dim room, listening to reports of nothing. No news from their colonies. No responses to their hails. Just the silent, staring eyes of the human ships in the sky, visible at night as cold, unmoving stars. A message arrived. It was not on the military bands, but on the old, simple emergency frequency. It was text in the common galactic script and Boran runes. A single unarmed shuttle will be permitted to ascend the human flagship. War Master Grash is to be aboard. You have 1 hour. There was no threat attached. No, or else. It was an instruction. Grash felt a hot rush of shame, the old Boran fury. He wanted to rally his warriors, to man the last ground-to-orbit cannons, and die fighting. But he looked at the faces of the other elders. He saw no fight there. He saw only a hollow, confused terror. They had fought wars. They understood loss. They did not understand this. This was not war. It was an execution that had already happened, and they were just waiting for the body to fall. The shuttle flight was the longest of Grash's life. He sat alone in the bare cabin, watching his homeworld shrink beneath him. He saw the dark scars where spaceports had been. He saw no lights in the industrial sectors. As he ascended, he passed through the debris field. A piece of a boring cruiser, the symbol of his clan still visible on the broken hull, spun slowly past his viewport. Then he saw the human ship. It was called the Unyielding Resolve. It was not the largest ship he had ever seen, but there was a quality to it, a stillness, that felt more threatening than any weapon. It did not look like a warship. It looked like a tool. Its bay doors opened, and his shuttle was guided in by tractor beams, not by his own pilot. He was met in the hangar by 2 human soldiers in their sleek armor. They did not point their weapons at him. They did not speak. They simply gestured for him to follow. The corridors of the ship were quiet, lit with a soft white light. He saw human crew members who glanced at him with no hatred, only a blank, professional focus. It was more unnerving than snarling anger. He was led to a room with a large, clear viewport looking back at Boran Prime. A human in a simple black uniform stood there. Captain Park Jihan. Grash knew his name from intelligence reports that now seemed like ancient fairy tales. War Master, Park said, with a small, Neutral nod. He did not offer a seat. "I am here," Grash said, his voice a rough growl. "What do you want? If you seek our surrender, state your terms. We will not beg." Park Ji-hun looked at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "Terms? Surrender? You misunderstand. Those are concepts for a war. This is not a war. It is a conclusion." A screen on the wall illuminated. President Park Min-seo was there, sitting in a plane room on Earth. She looked at Grash, and her gaze was like the void outside. "War Master Grash," she said. "You have destroyed us," Grash said, the fury returning. "Is this your victory speech? Do you wish to gloat?" President Park tilted her head slightly. "There is no victory. There is only cause and effect. You killed Sergeant Kim Jae. You ended the peace." She gestured slightly, as if to the universe itself. "Is what follows. For one life?" Grash exploded, taking a step forward. The human guards did not move, but their stillness became more intense. "You have shattered a civilization for one insignificant life. This is madness." "It is arithmetic," the president said, her voice never changing its calm, level tone. "You believed his life had a small value. We have demonstrated its true value. The value of a human peacekeeper is the entirety of the threat he died trying to stop. You have paid that price." Grash stood, breathing heavily. The simple, terrible logic of it was a cage closing around his mind. They had not done this in rage. They had done it as a calculation, a balancing of the scales. What happens now? You bomb our cities? Enslave our people? "No," President Park said. "That would be a waste, and it would make us like you. Your military and industrial capacity is gone. Your ability to project power beyond your atmosphere is zero. You will remain on Boren Prime. The quarantine field our ships will maintain will prevent any vessel from leaving, or any signal from getting out. You will have your planet. You will have the sun and the rain. You will have peace. A cage." Grash spat. "You make us prisoners." "You made yourselves prisoners the moment you pulled that trigger," she replied. "We are merely the guards. In time, generations from now, if your species learns the lesson Sergeant J died to teach, this quarantine may be re-evaluated. Not by us, perhaps. By those who come after. Remember this. Tell every child on your world. Humanity values peace, but we value our protectors infinitely more. Break the first, and we will visit upon you the second." The screen went dark. Grash stood in the silence, the immense, unbearable weight of finality crushing him. There were no more battles to fight, no enemies to curse. Just the quiet hum of the human ship and the view of his broken world. Captain Park Ji-hun spoke from behind him. "Your shuttle will return you to the surface. You have 12 hours. Then the permanent quarantine field will be activated. Goodbye, War Master." Grash was led back to the shuttle, his mind empty. The trip down was a blur. When the hatch opened on Boren Prime, the air smelled of dust and damp concrete. He stood on the landing pad, watching the shuttle rise quickly back to the stars. That night, and for every night after, the sky over Boren Prime was different. Among the familiar stars were new, unmoving points of light. Human watch stations. A silent, permanent reminder. On the bridge of the unyielding resolve, Captain Park Ji-hun looked at the same planet on his screen. He then turned to a smaller display on his command console. It showed Kim Jae's service photo. The man was smiling, his eyes kind. "It is done, Sergeant," Park said quietly, his voice the only sound on the quiet bridge. "Rest now." The human fleet began to move, not in celebration, but with the quiet purpose of a job completed. They turned their backs on Boren Prime and slipped into the faster-than-light streams, heading home. The galaxy had learned the price of killing a human peacekeeper. And Earth, its terrible lesson delivered, returned to its quiet watch. The peacekeepers would still wear their gray uniforms. They would still step between fighters with empty hands. But now, everyone knew what stood behind them. Not just an idea, but a promise written in fire and steel. A promise of absolute consequence.